So great work. I'm hopefully everyone is feeling better about the interview process. I feel like a lot of the questions you'll be seeing through this class will pop up actually through the real life interview process. So yeah, good job everyone. Great job on finishing the course. So as a quick agenda, we'll be doing around an hour of the Q&A, and we'll kind of wrap up with all the instructors giving their final thoughts and advice for all the students. So we'll do like an around the room for the instructors who are here for today's panel. So we have 5 of us total, and I'll have everyone kind of unmute themselves, I guess in the order I put up on the slide. Give us like a brief intro about yourself, and I guess as a fun icebreaker question, if there is a food that you were forced to eat for the rest of your life, so if you can't eat anything else, what food would you pick? And I'll start off with myself. So my name is Iris. I am currently a backend engineer on the Google Photos team. And prior to that, I worked at Pinterest. And at Pinterest, I actually did growth, working on full stack work and also infra. So a lot of my my experience has been in backend side of things. So prior to that, I went to school at Berkeley, and I graduated from Berkeley with a computer science degree. And if there's a food that I was forced to eat for the rest of my life and I couldn't eat anything else, I would pick sushi. So I'll pass it on to Noel.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I'm Noel. So a little bit about me. I went to the University of Illinois for undergrad and majored in computer science and music composition there. Around my sophomore, junior year of college, I decided to go down the path of entering industry. Interviewed at a lot of companies and definitely had my fair share of struggles going through the process, but ended up interning at Google while in school. After graduation, I returned there full time. I worked there for a little over 3 years and was a technical interviewer there. I worked pretty closely with hiring committees on candidate decisions, so I've kind of been on both sides of the equation interviewing wise. I left Google a while back for graduate school and finishing up there this semester, and have been working in the CS education space since.
Right, thanks. Sorry, Noel, I mispronounced your name. But yeah, we'll have Alec introduce himself.
Right on. Hi, everyone. I'm Alec. Oh, they want Noel's food, by the way, in the chat. I also went to University of Illinois. I knew Noel there. What's up? Haven't seen you in a while. I started in mechanical engineering, realized I was kind of shit at physics, switched to computer science about halfway through, and I'm all right at computer science. I didn't intern anywhere, and after graduating, crossed the country to San Francisco, where I started working at Yelp, doing machine learning on ads work. Did that for 2.5 years. That was fun. Quit my job, went all the way across the country to the other side. Now in New York City, I'm working at Google doing machine learning stuff there. That's a good synopsis. And the food I would choose, if I could choose one food for the rest of my life, it'd probably be ice cream. Wouldn't be a long life, but it would be a good life. Right on.
Yeah, I'm a big ice cream fan myself. Yeah, I'll have Liz introduce herself next then.
Hey everyone, I'm Liz. I'm Liz, the developer all over the internet. I've been an engineer for like 20 years. I didn't go to college for it. My parents were engineers, and so me and my dad started a startup when I was a teenager, and I spent a long time just being a freelance software engineer and sort of breaking into the industry, making HTML pages for.
Oh no, Liz, we lost her.
Places since then, and now I'm the CTO over at Edify, and I run R&D over at Carrot. So Carrot does interviews as a service, so that's why I know a little bit about interviews these days. But yeah, I'm one of those high school dropout break-ins, so that's my background. It's nice to meet y'all.
All right.
Oh, and my food, coconuts.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was gonna
contain
ask
all
you to
of
answer
the
that.
essential amino acids. You know, you got to get those amino acids in. So technically, coconuts would be probably what I would go with for survivability.
All right, a very practical response. Yeah, I'll have Mari. I think he'll be the final panelist. So
Hey guys, my name is Mari. I am an SE 103 instructor. Let's see, let's start with college. So I went to Cal, go Bears. I think Iris and I were the similar years. I think I never saw her because there's obviously hundreds of students in Berkeley. It's impossible to know everyone. But I was there. I ended up interning and going full time for Apple for about 2 years. Decided to go into a smaller company. I joined Coursera back when they were private for about a year and a half. And then I realized I really wanted to go to a company that really valued mobile technology. So I went to Facebook and have been at Facebook for 3 years now. Really love it. I obviously help out a lot with recruiting, also with diversity recruiting efforts as well. What else is there? I think that's pretty much it. I would probably, right, it's really impossible for me to just stick with one food because I just love a lot of food. But right now, I would say pad CU would be my my meal. Yeah.
all right, awesome. I like pad see you as well. I'm actually really craving Thai food now. So before we jump into the Slido questions, I felt like we'll have the instructors answer, I think, some questions that I think would have been really helpful to know going into industry or going through the whole interview prep process. So we'll start off with the question of, did you ever feel like overwhelmed or discouraged with like the whole prepping process? So going through all the interview questions and what do you do to stay motivated? I think especially after this course ends and you're kind of responsible for prepping on your own, like what do you do to stay motivated through that? Feel free to like unmute yourself and answer the question.
I had some thoughts. I always say like plant 2 or 3 seeds a day in terms of how many places you apply to. And honestly, if you do that, interviews will come and then you'll be forced kind of to stay prepped and stay focused. But if you stop applying because you think maybe you've lost out or like it's over, remember that every time you see a job description and it's still open, that means they're still accepting applications, which means you could be the one. So just plant 2 or 3 seeds a day and then you'll be okay.
I would kind of say that practicing for interviews is kind of like planting a tree. You're not going to get good at it in a few weeks. You need to keep at it for months. It took me personally about 3 months until I was able to crush my interviews. So don't feel discouraged if you feel like you're making small progress. It is true that you will make small progress, but if you keep at it, if you make a habit out of doing problems every day, if you repeat old problems and you practice mock interviews, eventually you will get to a stage where you feel really comfortable with the interview process. The sad thing is that 90% of people give up, and that's really unfortunate. So it does take a while to get good at it, but I promise you, if you put in the time, getting really good at interviews is one of those skills that will keep on giving for the rest of your CS career. And if you want to stay motivated, what I would say is a lot of people fall into the trap that they think they need to be able to solve hard leak code problems. That is not true at all. Actually, if you do all leak code hard problems, that's probably a recipe for demotivating yourself. And if you get demotivated, you stop practicing and you stop making it a habit. So one of my tips to stay motivated is to interleave easy, medium, and hard problems when you're practicing. I would say do about 20% easy questions, 60% hard, sorry, not hard, 60% medium questions and 20% hard questions is my recommendation. By doing it that way, by doing easy problems, you gain confidence in your skills. Medium problems, I think, is a good type of difficulty that you need to prepare for in interviews, because most of the time you do get asked medium type of problems. And if you want to level up your skill and get even better, sprinkle in some hard problems. And by doing that, you're not only gaining confidence, but you're also pushing your skills to the next level. So it's all about balance. Don't just think that you have to be solving all these leak code hard problems, because even us instructors find those problems hard to solve.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely felt overwhelmed and discouraged by the interview prep process. Personally, when I was looking for internships, I definitely failed a lot of my early interviews. And after a while, it kind of felt like putting in resumes was sending them into the void of no response. It was difficult, I think, at first to not take rejection personally, but I had to kind of see this as a number game, that if I didn't apply to more places, I wasn't going to get more interviews and wasn't going to get any offers that way. So the best advice that I would try and give is keep applying no matter what you're doing, even if it feels difficult, because every application that you don't send is an interview you won't get.
I don't think I have much to add other than, yeah, it's overwhelming just thinking about it, and I have a job. Every rejection is discouraging as hell. How do I stay motivated? I find that getting rejected from companies really sucks, because they basically just tell you no, and there's no really way to feel like, well, how do I get better? How do I do better next time? I found it a lot better to interview with friends at companies, older friends, and they'd be like, look, you have to get better at this, this, and this. And actually having like a light to go to is really valuable versus just a blind rejection.
Yeah. Actually, I went through the interview process, like, I guess now, wow, it's been like around 2.5 years ago. And at that point, I had been working for around 4 years. And it was really interesting to kind of go through the whole interview prepping experience again. And especially having worked for 4 years and not having been in school, a lot of the material was like, I was just really rusty. Aside from like the material I'd been teaching at CodePath, there are topics where I certainly like were pretty rusty. So I think initially when I was starting off, I definitely felt pretty discouraged. When you haven't really looked at some of those problems for a while, I think you just naturally forget it. It's like kind of like a muscle you need to strengthen. And I wasn't really diligent about like doing that over the years. So yeah, I don't think even as instructors we're like naturally like maybe really good at these problems. So it really takes a lot of practice. So I really like the advice of starting with easy first and then transitioning to medium and then going to like a few hard problems. I found that that was the easiest way to kind of ramp back up to topics I wasn't comfortable with or I hadn't touched in a while. And then aside from that, I think the other piece of advice would be to set a schedule. So stick to doing like 1 or 2 problems a day. I found that for me, I did them every morning, and it actually took me a while to find the right cadence. So it took me a while to figure out like, oh, actually, if I do 1 or 2 problems in the morning, that's when I'm like the most energized and when I can really just go through those problems. And over time, I felt like a lot more comfortable. And the last thing would be I would not spend too much time on one problem. So if like you don't really know how to do a problem and you've really put in a good amount of effort, I'd say like anything past 45 minutes to an hour, just like move on, like look at the solution, see maybe where you went wrong. And that actually happens to me quite often. So it's not like I go through all the medium problems and I know how to do them all. Sometimes even some of the medium ones can get me. So yeah, that's how I found it. The routine helped me stay consistent throughout the whole prepping process when I was going through it again. So I think moving on to the next question, I think some of the instructors kind of answer this, but I'm curious what your personal experience of like setbacks or rejections you've dealt with in the past, and what did you learn from them? And yeah, I'm curious to hear like actual failures. I think it's easy for students to see that we are working at these nice jobs, but it's interesting to hear everyone's stories.
I'll tell us.
I can take this one. So I'm sure I'm not the only case of this, but when I was in college, I sucked hard with data structure and algorithm interviews. And to be honest, the only reason why I was able to get my internship at Apple was because my interviewer decided to ask me questions that were role specific to my internship. So instead of asking me general data structure and algorithms, they would ask me like the frameworks and front end specific frameworks and JavaScript questions, which I was really good in. But aside from that, all the other interviews I've had, like for example, I remember I interviewed at Airbnb. They asked me a dynamic programming problem. It was literally just 45 minutes of me typing random JavaScript on the screen and having it spit out the wrong output. So that was really embarrassing. There was definitely some interviews in college where I just wish I don't remember. But now in hindsight, I am glad that I remember those experiences because that kind of helped instill to me like how different algorithms and data structure skills are from your day-to-day work. So like, here's the thing. You can be really good at JavaScript, iOS, Android, AI, or ML, but that doesn't mean you're gonna ace these interviews. But also like, if you are good at those skills, there are some interviews that you're gonna do well in. And for the people in SE 103, we talked about the different types of interviews. There is the general data structure algorithm interview, and there's the role-specific technical interview. And your technical interview is like a spectrum. It can be either purely generalist or purely role specific and anywhere in between. So in college, I was really good at role specific, but I wasn't really good at the generalist type of interview. So my setback for me in college was I couldn't pass those types of interviews. And it wasn't until a few years in the industry that I was able to realize how to practice for those types of interviews. So I was able to, apply deliberate practice and spaced repetition and just crank out a lot of problems on LeetCode. And over time, I was able to get really good at generalist data structure interviews. So that was kind of my main learning, is that when it comes to technical interviews, there's two types. There's role specific and there's generalist, and there's anywhere in between. So you wanna first figure out what your goal is. If your goal is to get a job at the FANG companies, chances are you wanna get good at your generalist skills. However, if the companies that you wanna apply for care about your role specific skills, then it doesn't make sense for you to do a lot of LeetCode stuff, but just get really good at those role specific skills. So think about your goals and tailor your practice according to them. That is my biggest advice.
I'll tell a story. So I had been an engineer for about 10 years when I moved to Silicon Valley, and I build off of Mari's thing. Like, I suddenly went from role specific interviews to very generalist, like tech interviews. So they were asking me all these structures and algorithms questions. And I had, again, been a senior engineer for like 10 years. So I went and I interviewed at Square, and I interviewed at ThoughtWorks, and I just bombed those interviews because they were data structures and algorithms questions, and they really wanted to see my computer science on display, and they wanted me to code in Ruby, and I had been in the Microsoft stack, which was very popular in the central time zone generally. So when I got here, I couldn't pass any of the interviews, and I thought, oh no, was I a fraud this whole time? Was I never really an engineer? And it turns out I had just been scamming these companies into like thinking I was an engineer. Oh no. And so I thought I kind of had to start all over again. And I went to like an introduction to JavaScript class. And that was where I realized, oh no, I know JavaScript. I don't have to start all over again. It's really just these data structures and algorithms that I don't know. And it's because I often, you don't really use trees super often. There are places where you use them, but like if your job is to build websites, you're not really using the DOM as a tree. You just use document.getElementById and things like that. So because a lot of those things were like abstracted away, I was not really up to speed on that stuff. And I honestly learned it by like studying what other people were getting in their interviews and then just learning those algorithms. And I eventually just built up a big list of algorithms that I now teach, and people pass interviews with these algorithms. And so it really is just learning what are the standard interview questions, because you're not necessarily going to run across those, and it's not just junior devs that struggle. It doesn't mean that you don't know how to code or that you're not really an engineer if you bomb a data structures and algorithms thing, because that's not really the fundamental act of solving problems with computers. That's just, that's like a deeper study. And so try not to take it on. It's easy to take it on and go, I don't know anything, like I did, and I had been an engineer for 10 years when it happened. So, you know, yeah, don't take it on, really, is the big thing that I learned. And it really is just learning the list of algorithms and data structures that they give you. So, yeah.
So I did talk a little bit in the previous question about like setbacks I experienced. So I'll kind of talk about what I learned from them. So for my early interviews that I didn't do well on, I feel like the two things that I noticed was, one, obviously needing a little more preparation than I have, but definitely nerves during the process of interviewing. I found at first, even when I did feel like I had a handle on problems they were asking me, it might not go how it did when I was practicing problems on LeetCode or interview websites or anything like that. So what I found the most helpful was putting myself in scenarios similar to the environments I might be interviewing in. So mock interviews with a friend was the primary way that I built comfort in interviews. Me and a friend in college did like a mock interview once a day with each other for about 2 to 3 months. And I think that was the primary thing that made me feel comfortable interviewing. Yeah, so definitely this program, I think if you got a chance to lead problems in breakout rooms, that kind of thing was absolutely what made me feel ready to interview.
I'll take a slightly different approach to this. For me, the harder thing was I didn't do any internships, which I regret now, and regretted particularly my senior year of college, when everyone would be blindly applying to companies or getting their return offers, and I was getting nothing. I was getting nothing but like bot rejection notices. Like I'd send it in, and 10 seconds later I get an email saying, oh, you're not a good fit. So even then, it was just very frustrating to just even get an interview. And the thing that I learned is, okay, if you don't have the experience, if you feel like you're a little behind on paper, you've got to find different ways to make yourself stand out. So go to your career fairs, try to get face to face with a recruiter. Learn your. If you can't get past the computer systems to get your resume through, try to win over in other ways. That's what I learned about the interview process. Is the systems that work for some people will not work for you, but there are ways around them. That's what I gotta say.
Okay, I accidentally went to the next slide, but personally, I've struggled with everything that we just talked about. So getting my first internship interview, I started computer science my summer of freshman year. So after all of freshman year had been done, I had started my first computer science class. And then I guess I wanted to get an internship the summer after my sophomore year, but at that point, I didn't feel comfortable interviewing until the spring. So I remember in the spring, a lot of actually big companies had actually already finished recruiting. So it was just honestly, it was kind of a struggle trying to find like open positions and also finding like interview opportunities, because a lot of companies are also looking for people who had experience. So I lucked out because I think Facebook at that time was still hiring. But I think prior to that position opening up, I emailed a lot of startups. So at Berkeley, they had like a startup fair, but even then I would go through like random startups that I found through VC websites and just see if they had any internships open. So I went through the whole process of cold emailing and did all that. So even though I reached out to a lot of different companies, applied to a lot of different companies, I really ended up really only with one offer. So yeah, I think getting that first opportunity is like quite challenging, and it really does require like being quite resourceful and being really on top of just seeing all the different job listings. I think it's a bit easier if your school has job listings to go through that avenue. And then aside from that, once I had that one internship under the belt, I think back in the day, LeetCode just wasn't as big. So when I was recruiting for my second round of internships, so the internship for the summer before my senior year, that was the first time I did like quite a few interviews, and I feel like I failed a vast majority of them because I just really didn't know like what questions they're asking. I kind of just relied on my honestly like data structure skills I had, but I felt like it wasn't sufficient. I didn't really practice well enough either. So even though I didn't do so high recruiting for that internship season, it was really helpful to have that information, because going into recruiting for full-time roles, then I learned that I should really kind of mock interview with my friends, ask around my friends to see like what questions are being asked, and to really prep specifically for the types of questions that were being asked. And I had a lot more success going into like full-time roles. So yeah, it's been like, I feel like it's really common to bump into all the obstacles that people have talked about, and it's just part of the process. But yeah, I've had an experience similar to Mari where like I just bombed the interview. Like I went in and it just like I didn't really make substantial progress, and I think that's just part of the process too. So I think I kind of just expect it at this point. Like I kind of expect that like going through the whole recruiting process, there might just be like one or two interviews or maybe a few where it's just really challenging, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you won't end up getting like an offer at the very end from like one of the companies you apply to. And honestly, there have also been points where I didn't think I did so well, but the interviewer thought like I made good progress and it ended up being okay. So yeah, I'll move on to the, I guess, last question before we go into the Slido. Sorry, this is taking a bit of time, but here's what life was like going from school into your first internship, or from school to full-time.
I think the biggest difference going from a school setting, from an environment where you're used to being told what to do, to an environment where it's kind of like it's more up to you. I think that was the biggest change. So for example, and I think this kind of ties into one of the Slido questions, is what is the skill that is missing most in new grads that go into the industry? And after like experiencing myself go through this, and also looking at the interns whenever we do calibrations and whenever I mentor or manage interns, the biggest skill that people are lacking when they enter the industry is just self-direction and proactiveness. Like, sure, you may come from a really good university and you might know data structures, but your job as an engineer is much more than coding. It's all, a lot of it has to do with aligning your team on the project, making sure things get done, making sure things are good quality, and just knowing how to make progress whenever there's a lot of murkiness in the product roadmap, right? Most students, most if not all students going to industry don't really know that because they haven't had that experience. So when I went into the industry, and whenever we would go to meetings, I would kind of just be lost, because I'm like, wait, what are we supposed to do? I don't know how to make progress in my project. Who do I talk to? How do I get buy-in? How do I make sure everyone is in agreement of this? Those were the hardest things, not the coding part. The coding part arguably is the easiest part. It's all about the technical things that made it hard because you weren't used to interacting with people, and you didn't really know how to navigate this corporate structure that you were now in, because you were always told like, oh, just submit your assignment, just do this. But in your career in the industry, no one's going to tell you what to do. You need to find it out for yourself and experience it. So that's kind of, I think, my answer to this question is.
I actually found school, the full-time, really relaxing, to be honest. Like, it's a different set of skills, and like everything Mari says holds true. But I found it really relaxing that if you're not on call for the most part, and at school it's all encompassing, right? It could be midnight and you're like, well, I have an assignment due tomorrow, so I better start working at midnight. But it's really nice to say, well, it's 5 p.m. and this work is going to be here tomorrow, so see ya. I find that life really opened up, quite frankly, that like I was no longer pressured 24 hours of the day. I was only pressured 8 hours of the day, 5 days a week. That's how I'm happy to talk about it more, but that's how I felt.
For me, so school into my first internship was definitely a little uncertain. It was pretty hard for me to tell how I was doing in my role as an intern. And I didn't initially feel comfortable asking my manager for feedback on how I was doing. Very different than school, where you usually have graded feedback, like constantly coming at you about how you're doing in the class. So for me, I think becoming more proactive about discussing my progress was a big turning point for me when it came to my progress in my internship.
Yeah, I think for me, the struggle I had was asking questions. So in addition to not asking for feedback, I felt like my first internship was Facebook, and that was really intimidating. I felt like I was surrounded with people who had interned before, and or like surrounded by people who have been coding for years, like even before college. So I felt like there's a constant fear of like, oh, should I know this? Like, should I have known this? I think in school, it's projects are kind of scoped down to like you're learning like 1 or 2 new pieces of technology, whereas when you go into like an internship role for the first time, you're learning a lot of different things at once. And honestly, likewise, like every time you go to a new full-time job, you're like ramping up on like a new set of technologies. So I think I struggled with asking questions. There's like a balanced asking questions where like if you've done initial like research and you've tried to kind of figure out the question, and if you spent like a sufficient amount of time trying to figure out the answer, honestly, like your mentor really is there to help you answer questions and to help unblock you. So I was on one end of the spectrum where I just wasn't asking enough questions. So I would end up like spending a lot of time trying to unblock myself, and it just wasn't that productive. And ultimately, I realized that the expectation was never that I needed to know how to do these things on my own. In terms of like these questions, I could just ask my mentor and they could really answer them pretty easily for me. And the other thing is being overwhelmed by all like the new technology. I find that if you have a good intern mentor, normally, hopefully, they give you like a small starter project. So it's taking things like, or like a small starter task. So it's taking things like a day at a time. Like, how do I get this like one change in first before you move on? And you kind of naturally will build up that knowledge over time. So putting pressure on yourself to try to understand everything really early on is just, I think, really stressful and not realistic. So that's what I've learned, honestly, from like my first internship, my first few internships. Yep. Yeah, cool. So I am going to pull up the Slido and look at, and we can go through the top few questions. Oh, sorry. Let me link to the Slido in the chat. And Noel brought up a good point. When you ask questions, I also generally like to preface with like, what did I try to do to answer this question, and try to figure out like how I would be able to unblock myself in the future. So Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we can go through the list of the most popular questions. So we'll start off with the first one with, if you don't feel confident interviewing for jobs, should you wait or just apply? Like, they want to give themselves more time to prep, but also worry about having no headcount left.
My opinion is it's your job to apply and their job to reject you, and you shouldn't do their job for you. You shouldn't do their job for them. Just apply.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's really easy to always feel like you're not ready. So sometimes you kind of just have to do it, and then you realize you're ready way sooner than you think. Yeah. Sorry, any other instructors who want to add on to this one?
Just apply. If you don't feel confident now, you're not just around the corner from feeling confident. Like, you're just not going to feel confident. Just apply.
All right, moving on to the next question. I think a bit more specific. If you're lost during an interview solving problem, what's the best way to ask for hints or help from the interviewer?
I can answer this one. So it's much better to tell the interviewer your thought process and why you are stuck versus just telling them, yo, I'm lost. Can you give me a hint? Right? It sounds much better. And also it gives the interviewer more feedback on exactly what hint you need. Because here's the thing, as an interviewer, our job is to give you the smallest hint possible so that you can make progress in the question. It's not our job to give you a big clue, because that would just be giving away the answer. We want to know what you know, what you don't know. So don't just say, I don't know, please give me a hint. Tell them your thought process so that the interviewer can know what hint to give you. Because what you don't want is, you don't want the interviewer to give you a big hint, because in their feedback, what they would say is like, oh yeah, I just gave him this big hint. That's why he was able to solve the problem, right? So tell them your thought process, tell them exactly why you're stuck is my answer.
All right, we'll go on to the next question. But yeah, it's true. We do kind of write out what hints we've given, and generally we want to stick to like small hints that kind of help along the process, rather than realistically really won't be giving a big hint. The next question would be, what are the biggest mistakes you see new grads make when choosing a place to work?
I see a lot of new grads applying and getting jobs at like a startup that is so early stage that like it's for people, and they end up taking a job where they get paid almost nothing to be an engineer. And so like I would say, if they're not going to pay you an engineer's salary, you're not going to work hard and show them that you deserve an engineer's salary. They're not going to change from paying you something crappy. Like, they're really just trying to get like cheap, easy labor at that point. So if it's a startup that says, we can't really pay you, or we can pay you like minimum wage, it's not going to change. Keep looking. Like, you land that job, it's a freelance job. Keep looking. You don't have like your job now.
I guess I'm thinking like, what did I wish I knew when I was choosing a place to work? I think, so I don't think I realized the importance of my manager and having a really good manager. So if you're in the position where you're lucky enough to pick your manager, or you get to like talk to a few managers before picking a specific manager, I think it's really important that you're picking a manager who you feel like you can have really like honest conversations with. So if you don't really feel comfortable with that manager, I feel like you should try to keep looking. I think my first manager, I feel like it was like a very, I feel like I was always a bit intimidated to like talk to them about serious stuff. And I realized then that like after having like, I've gone through a lot of managers at this point, but I realized like the dynamic of the manager is really, really important. Aside from that, also getting to know the teammates and getting to know the teammates you'll work with, and having like working, I think, in a very welcoming environment, I think mattered a lot as well. And I really didn't know these things going in as a new grad. So I think being in an environment where people are nice, people are friendly, really kind of helped me in terms of my growth. Yeah.
I can chime in on this one. So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make in the beginning is that they like to over-index on one aspect of a company. So here, I'll tell you what my mistake was. In college, I was over-indexing on prestige and just name recognition. So like, yes, I'm gonna go to Apple because I want to be an iOS engineer, and Apple is the best place to become an iOS engineer. I went to Apple 2 years later. I'm like, oh my God, I hate Apple. Like, I don't like the people I'm working with. I don't like this culture that I'm a part of. So I'm going to go to this other company, and I'm going to over index on culture now. So I decided to go to an ed tech company, Coursera, because I love online education. I just like teaching in general. So I kind of over index on that one. So I went to Coursera and I was like, man, I love the mission, but I kind of wish my work was valued more. So I'm going to go to this other company that really values mobile work. So I decided to go to Facebook. So now I'm at Facebook and I'm having something similar. It's like, my work is really valued, but the public recognition of Facebook's not the best. And, there's like these things in like mainstream social media that just makes us look like crap, right? So it's like, it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be trade-offs, and you're never going to be at a company where it ticks all the boxes. So think about what you really value and go to that company, and just know that that company is not going to be perfect. All right. But it might be the perfect company for you. So like, just think about what you value. Just remember, a company is not going to get 100% on all the things that you want. This is my tip.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, I think if you're interning, it would be kind of helpful to think about like, hey, like, what did I enjoy about this experience? I think in general, like trying to reflect on like what really makes you happy at work, like what I think it's like trying to figure out the process of not the process, like what factors matter a lot more to you. It does take time to figure out what's important. So I think with every new company I work at, like I've learned more about my preferences and what matters. So yeah, I think, okay, so Noel did mention his food, but it's really, the question is gain in popularity. So
Yeah.
I'll have him answer what his food is.
Yeah, no, I love all the attention on my food choice. So I had an amazing banh mi last week, and I have not been able to think about any other food since. So I want to eat banh mi for the rest of my life. I hope this answer was enough.
Great. So I guess for the question of like what skills do you find most lacking in new grads that just entered industry, is there anything else that you wanted to add on to that? I feel like we touched on it, but I wanted to make sure that everyone.
A lot of times with a new grad, I will see a couple of patterns. One is that you don't want to show your work until it's perfect. And often, like, if you can keep the feedback time really short, so like you're done with your code and then it works, but it's not optimized, and you show that to somebody and you say, is this what I was supposed to have made? That will really help a lot. So, just don't worry about showing like imperfect code. Nobody thinks that your first pass is gonna be super perfect. So
All right. So I guess we'll talk about the next one. How many months in advance should you apply to a new grad role?
So I
think
would
it's
say, okay.
after you.
Okay, yeah, I would say it depends very much on the company. Like a lot of the big tech companies tend to do their hiring in like fall, whereas like smaller companies might do a lot of hiring in the spring. So you should definitely consider the company themselves and when they're posting jobs, if they say that the like the primary hiring range of dates, for example, sometimes that is included. Um, yeah, I would definitely just keep an eye on like the type of company that you're applying to when considering that question.
I agree with Noel, and I think just to add one more statement, if it's truly a new grad role, the moment they put it out, they're not expecting you to join next week. They're expecting you to join when you graduate. So hopefully the first question out of their mouth is, when do you graduate? And they calibrate to you and not vice versa.
Data at Carrot suggests that if you apply at least 2 months before the role begins interviewing, you have the best chance of being added into the pool of people who get interviewed. And yeah, smaller companies tend to do it in the January to March range, and larger companies tend to do it mostly in September and October, and some in August. Right now at Carrot, like every interviewer is booked on university recruiting, so yeah, that's what's going on at Carrot.
Yeah, I actually find that really, really big companies kind of generally have new grad openings available for interview. Like I remember both in the fall and then in the spring, like Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Google were also like pretty much still hiring new grads. Whereas I found that a lot of like the mid-sized companies would end up filling up in the fall. Like they, like for example, at Pinterest, they had like a specific set number of new grad roles, and a lot of times they kind of would end up filling up in that fall semester, so like by around December, and then they wouldn't do as much new grad recruiting in the spring. So that's my personal experience, whereas like I guess startups generally are a bit flexible, and the demand might be random, so they might need a new grad suddenly in the spring. So that's my personal experience. All right, so next question. How do you keep up to date with all the things in the tech industry?
I don't.
Nobody does. Follow what you're interested in. That's how you keep up. Like, if you're interested in AI and ML, like play around with it. If you're interested in drones, play around with them. Like, don't try to keep up with the tech industry. It's like trying to keep up with, I don't know, any other huge industry like accounting or something, everybody needs it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also don't. But the one thing I want to say is that also saw that when some of my friends did get jobs and stuff like that, they did try and keep up at the same pace with like new technology and stuff that was coming out. And they found that really exhausting, and it helped contribute to things like burnout and stuff like that for them. So I definitely say when looking into things outside of like your work duties, definitely make sure you're looking at yourself as well. You're giving yourself enough of a break and time away from it if you need that.
Yeah, I think I used to feel that pressure. I feel like I don't have that pressure anymore. So organically, I don't try to specifically keep up with certain technologies, but I think sometimes I'll come across like an interesting company eng blog post, and I'll just kind of read that casually. So if I think maybe you want sources of like blog posts to read, company eng blog posts are good. I think there are certain, I'm not really great about this, but I think like Hacker News or certain like Reddit sub forums are kind of like good places to maybe like find articles if you're interested. I know some of my friends follow some of the big names in their respective domains on Twitter. And generally that is kind of how they find out about things. But yeah, I guess I don't want to say that like you have to do these things, just like if you wanted to. And then aside from that, at least at Google or at whatever company you join, I think generally the bigger ones, they tend to have like interesting like reading groups. Like a lot of times I'll see like paper reading groups where they will cover papers every week. And also like when people within the company put out design docs, I feel like that's also like a really great way to see what new technology is being used. So that's kind of how I keep up to date, and it happens pretty organically. So I don't feel the pressure to. And I would also not claim that I am very up to date with everything.
I just want to add that like a lot of these new technologies aren't really groundbreaking. And like, for example, how many times does a new JavaScript framework come out every day, right? It's ridiculous. Like you're not going to keep up with like all these framework.js things if you're a front-end developer. But if you know your fundamentals really well, you don't really need to catch up with all those new frameworks because they're built very similarly underneath the hood. And as long as you know, as long as you have a good base set of fundamentals, it's going to be very easy for you to learn new things. So instead of trying to keep up with all these new hot technologies that are mostly fads, focus on investing in the core fundamentals because those are the skills that will help you advance and learn things really fast.
Yeah, I actually was just having a conversation with my friend about this, where like, so I'm in backend. So there are like all these different components on like how code is being deployed and like all the different parts of the stack. And definitely like new companies come out with new tooling. And I think if you have like I think if you invest in the time to understand like the fundamentals or like the building blocks of what exists and how the current systems work, when you go and learn a new system, it's kind of just like mapping it to what you know already and learning that new thing. If you've really invested the time to learn in like the core set of fundamental technologies, it's not too bad. So if you kind of know database technologies well, if you're trying to learn a new one, generally it's not too bad to kind of like ramp up or like learn that new technology. But I think it does require some time to kind of really fully make sure you know the fundamentals well. And there's if you're interested in like backend related stuff, there are some like good books. There's like a designing data intensive applications book. There are some like really good resources to really learn the fundamentals well. All right, so okay, next question. How often do you study leak code questions when you're not interviewing?
When I'm teaching you guys.
Same. I don't relook at these very often. Only when I have to teach it to y'all.
And I actually think maybe, at least for me, that's the reason why I like to teach, is because it forces me to keep my skills sharp and retain the information. To be honest, I'm learning as much as I'm teaching you guys, as my students are learning from me. And that's because in order for me to teach you guys, I need to know the material really well.
I'm the same. So aside from like the interview questions I ask, it's I know the weeks I teach really well, and then the weeks I don't teach, I don't know that well, honestly. So all right. Any other thoughts on that? We can move on to the next question. Okay, that's a pretty good question. What should you do if you end up not getting any internships in the summer?
I would get together with a crew of other people who didn't get an internship and make something that is not trivial. Like build a server or a website for something you like, something you care about, like fan teams or fantasy football or anything like that. And just make something and then put it on GitHub.
I think I remember some of my friends actually ended up looking into like on-campus research type roles. So if you don't end up getting like an industry internship, those are honestly also great. So looking on campus to see if any like professors need help with any of their research that might involve some coding. I thought on-campus opportunities were also like a great way to get some work experience that I don't think a lot of people consider as well.
This actually happened to my brother because of COVID. What happened was his internship got canceled. And I think that actually happened to a lot of people, which was really unfortunate. So what he ended up doing was he actually ended up doing aside from doing your own projects and doing research position, one thing you could also look into is teaching opportunities. So what he actually ended up doing was he ended up teaching Facebook University, which was funny because he didn't get into Facebook University, but he was going to be the instructor for it. So like he ended up doing that. So he at least was able to keep sharp on his iOS skills and teach and also get paid as well. But at the same time, while he was doing that, I told him to go ham on LeetCode and practice interviewing so that when the next year comes around, he'll be prepared. And actually that ended up working really well because during this year now, he was able to crush his interviews. So like, you should always be investing in your interviewing skills whenever you can.
Oh yeah, also as a, I guess this kind of is relevant to what Mari just said and the previous questions in terms of leak coding. You can always kind of help out and contribute back into like the code path or by becoming a mentor. And we've heard from the mentors that it's like some of the mentors are actually themselves also going through the interview process, and they found that being mentors themselves were really helpful in keeping their, it was really helpful in terms of like getting good practice, but also like keeping their skills sharp because you're picking like 1 or 2 questions from each topic every week. So I'd also highly recommend looking into mentoring if you wanted to keep that skill active. Okay, I'll take a few more questions since we're at around like the hour mark, but I think a good question is, have you decided it was time to look for a new job? I can talk about my experience. So I went from Pinterest. So I stayed at Pinterest for around 4 years and then went to Google, and I've been at Google for 2 years. Yeah, I think for me, okay, I guess I'll talk about at Pinterest. I actually was on infrastructure for 2 years and then I switched to growth for 2 years. And I feel like sometimes looking for a new job, the thought process of like switching teams is kind of similar to when I decide to look for a new job. So at Pinterest, when I decided to look for a new job, I decided it was because I'd been in backend for a while and I just really wanted to learn full stack. Like I felt like I never did it. So around the 2-year mark, I guess I was feeling pretty comfortable in backend, and I decided that I actually really didn't know full stack very well. And that was the time I decided to switch teams. And then after that, I was on my full stack team for 2 years. And that's when I decided, like, I think at the point where I ramp up and get really comfortable with the team, and then I kind of start to look into the future and see how I'm going to grow. And I think if the growth isn't really aligned with where I want to grow, that's kind of when I have a conversation with my manager in terms of saying if it's possible to kind of like on the current team I'm on, for there to be opportunities for me to grow in that direction, or if not, then I start to look. And when I did my job switch to Google, I actually looked both within Pinterest and then also decided maybe I should also explore other opportunities outside of Pinterest. So it was the mix for me where I looked internally and externally and then decided I think it would be a good experience for me to work at a different company. I think good for growth. And I also matched up with a team that I really liked. So that's my answer. It's just when I start to reevaluate where I want to see myself grow, and if it's not aligned, then I start to look for new opportunities.
I am a chronic jumper between different companies, and I tend to leave after about a year and a half to maybe 2 years. Usually because I can get more money somewhere else, or the people that I'm working with, I don't agree with how they're doing business or how they're doing something, and so I leave based on principles, things like that. So it's okay to leave based on principles and find a new job if you don't like what your work is doing. um, or especially if you can get more money somewhere else and not be less happy than you are now. It's good because the more jumps you make, the more you tend to actually make. I know a lot of people who stayed at companies based on this idea of company loyalty, and they're not humans, the company, and they will let you go if they need to. So don't have company loyalty. It's usually not worth it, unless you work for a scrappy nonprofit trying to change the world like CodePath, and then you should hang out with them as long as you can. Yeah, Cole, I am basically constantly applying to other companies. Yeah, never stop applying. That's my motto.
I definitely agree with that. Like, there's a difference between a time to look for a new job and a time to accept a new job, and those are very different measures. Time to look for a new job is when I think Iris hit the nail on the head, when you stop growing, and time to switch to new job. Well, then there's a bunch of things that we talked about before: your manager, your other coworkers, the money, the principals. All those come into consideration when deciding to accept. But look should be a very low bar. You should look pretty much anytime you have a bad day. You have a bad day, you go on the LinkedIn immediately afterwards. Hit up a recruiter, make yourself feel pretty. You know how it is.
I think everyone is going to have a different answer to this, and it boils down to what you value. So like in the beginning, as a new grad, what I valued was obviously a part of it was compensation. A good part of it was also mentorship. So that was what I valued in the beginning. But as I went through my career, the things that I started to value started to become different. So like I started to value growth more. When I became a mid-level engineer, I wanted to become more senior. So I valued growth more. So that's kind of like the main things I was gauging against when I was looking for other opportunities. Now it is kind of shifting. Like I still do value growth, but I also do value some type of stability now. And obviously, as you progress more in your career, for example, if you're gonna have a family, if you're gonna have kids, you might start to value stability more. So the opportunities out there will change for you based on what you value. And also when you decide to look for a new job. So for example, if you're at a startup that is very small, very unstable, high risk, high reward, but if you wanna have a family, it's reasonable to think that you would probably wanna go to a company that is more stable, right? So it really depends on where you are in your life. And that will really influence when you decide to look for a new job and what place you're in.
Yeah, so for me as well, I think I also have a slightly different answer to this. For me, I think whenever I considered looking for a new job, it was generally about whether I felt like I was happy with sort of the day-to-day of the job. I think for me, the first things though I would do would be try and talk to my manager, for example, to see if I could, shift my current responsibilities and roles towards something that I think I would like better. But as well, obviously, looking outside, seeing what's out there, seeing what might be exciting for me to take on next.
Yeah. I guess I wanted to say that I've been really lucky. Like I have not had a terrible manager or really bad work-life balance, because I know I've had friends who ultimately ended up in a really bad work situation, and that kind of forced them to look externally. Although one piece of advice I did get, I remember relatively early in my career, was like, you should always kind of maybe every year or two just interview, like at least with one company, or just because you want to make sure your skills are intact. And also it is a really kind of like a useful way to see if you're being compensated at like market level, if that's of importance to you. So making sure those skills are intact, I think is great. Also, then if it comes time where you do really want to look for a job, it's not as daunting of a process because you kind of have kept up with interviewing periodically. So yeah, I still think even in your current role, I still like to look at like, oh, like, are there other interesting up and coming companies that could be exciting to look at? So yeah. But I do have friends who are like very happy where they are. They don't plan on leaving Google. Like they're very happy there. So it kind of depends on what your priorities are as well. So yeah, I think we will answer the next set of 3 questions and we'll call it a day. So a lot of it is revolving around kind of like new grad or like intern. So like if you've mentored new interns or new grads before, what were the qualities of the best interns? What were some things you wished they didn't do?
I would say the one, oh, go ahead.
After you.
Okay. So I think the one thing that I would say is if you're asking questions, definitely if you're like can take notes on like the responses you're getting and stuff like that. I personally would keep like when I was interning, I would keep like a document with like the answers I had gotten because it was just very easy to hear something and then have like 10 other things come at you and then feel like I need to ask the same question again to like a manager or something like that. And I think having sort of like a document that almost acted like a cheat sheet on the things you were learning to do there was really useful, I would say.
Alec, did you want to say something? Oh no, okay. I think for me, the best quality I've seen in all the interns that have passed through my team are they were very proactive in the sense that when they had their project and I would tell them what we needed to do, they would know how to fill in the blanks. Like for example, oh, we need to know what kind of feature to build. So the best interns would know what to do. Okay, I need to set up a meeting with these stakeholders. I need to lead that meeting. Lackluster interns, they're like, okay, what do I need to do? Right? They need much more hand holding. But the best interns know how to execute. You just point them to the right direction and they know how to execute and get the job done. Those are the best interns. Also, code quality. Sure, if you're an intern, you will make mistakes, but the best interns do not make the same mistakes more than once. They learn really fast. Like when we're doing code reviews and I point this thing out, they will never make that mistake again. They will iterate, they will learn fast. They are fast learners. Lackluster interns make the same mistake over and over again. It slows them down, it slows down their productivity, and we see it during calibrations. What are some things you wish they didn't do? I wish they didn't break stuff because it makes me stressed. But the best interns, like, sure, you might break things, but you will learn from it and you will never do that again. Other interns, they will keep breaking stuff and it causes you a headache.
I think I've really always just looked for motivation in interns, like a motivation to learn, a motivation to, yeah, take a project and take charge. If you don't know already what to do, like you've never called a stakeholder meeting before, it's okay to ask. But don't just say like, what do I do? Ask for specific help, especially if you're one of those ADD people who kind of needs stuff like broken down for you. What are the steps to do this thing? It's totally fine. Ask up front, make it clear that you're trying to do the thing that is needed of you and not that they have to kind of pull you out of your chair and make you get going, right? It's not school. Don't act like you're in school and like the teacher can't make you do anything. Like you're getting paid, so like hold on to it. Be very eager, I think. And like the things that they didn't do. Work drama. I will, just say like, don't start drama with the other interns. I've seen a lot of that, and if somebody's bothering you, just try to avoid them, and if but try to stay out of trouble, I guess, because sometimes you get into a big intern program and there's like at least one weird intern that like pulls you into some drama. So just try to stay out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess adding on to that, I think it's okay to make mistakes. So it's not like you have to be perfect. But yeah, I think like learning from that, but also I think adding on to what Liz said, just having a good attitude and being someone that I would want to work with, I think is important. Not just as an intern, just generally as a good coworker. So that's also something I think we think about. Is this like someone who's like a good attitude? Just generally, that's really important as well. Easy to work with. I have not seen any intern drama actually, so it's really interesting to hear that. But yes, I think generally not being involved in drama is a good idea. So yeah, okay. I'll pick the last question, which is what do you have any advice for like the mindset of a new grad who will just start working and joining a new team?
I always go into the mindset that everything is a win-win situation. So like either you get the job done, which is great, or you fail and you become better. That's kind of my mindset in everything, and that has helped me just have a more positive outlook on work.
From someone who's been in the industry for 4 years, when I think of a new grad, I expect enthusiasm. I expect like, oh, I want to prove myself. I'm excited to just try new things and get in this. And I expect, they can code, I throw a project at them, they're excited to take it on, and, I can walk away for 8 hours and come back and they have questions or progress. I guess I don't expect them to walk in and they don't know the code base, they don't know the product that well. They shouldn't come into the meeting and say, they're doing it all wrong. You idiots, you wrote this in Java, should be C++. I don't expect that. If that's my expectations as a full-time engineer.
Yep, I think growth mindset is really important. So yeah, I think that's also just helpful. So if things go wrong, think of it as a good learning opportunity. It helps you grow stronger. And yeah, I think that's really important just generally as you're starting off, and be eager to learn. And yeah, I think that's mostly it. So I guess as a wrap up, actually, I guess here's like a question I'd be interested in hearing everyone's answers to. So I feel like across the board, we have people working in different parts of the stack. So I'm kind of a little curious about how everyone ended up where they were. So like, I guess we have Mari, who's working like in iOS mobile development, and we have Liz, who has done a lot of like front end, and because I've done a lot more backend. So I'm kind of curious how everyone decided to be where they are and how they got there. So yeah, I guess I can start off. So I guess I've mostly been doing backend, and I think it was just something naturally I was interested in. So I really enjoyed all the like system levels classes I took. So I actually did end up doing some research in like backend systems and decided that that was a good fit. So for my first internship, I ended up doing an infra internship, and I specified that I wanted to do backend, and then have kind of been there ever since. So I'm curious, like, how everyone got to where they were, like what teams they're working on and their journey there.
I was actually primarily a front-end web developer in college, and it wasn't until mobile got really popular that I wanted to give iOS a shot. So when I graduated a semester early, and I took that next semester to do an internship. And actually, I learned iOS through CodePath. CodePath was doing their first or second cohort ever. And it would happen in the Zynga office in San Francisco. And I remember that's how I met Tim and Nathan. But what would happen was I would go through my internship, I would learn iOS there, then I would go to Zynga in the evenings and learn more iOS. So I ended up going back to Apple doing iOS. And I mainly chose front-end technologies because I was a very, very visual person. So I kind of naturally gravitated to front end. But now when I'm at Facebook, I wouldn't say I'm really an iOS developer anymore. I think I'm more of a generalist mobile developer because Facebook tries to cater to both Android and iOS. And I think it kind of comes like as you progress in your career, you kind of just expand and broaden your scope, because that's how you that's one of the ways that you can make a bigger impact in your team, is if you broaden out your technical skill set, and you can lead people better that way. So lately I've been expanding to other technologies within Facebook. I feel like I'm getting more interested in mobile infrastructure and maybe possibly back end, but it's kind of just like on the horizon. But that's kind of how I see myself growing more, is less specialization, but more breadth.
I have a long history, but to get into the beginning of it, the first thing that I worked on was with my dad's startup chart writer, which we were like making medical note-taking software for doctors, basically medical records. And I worked with Visual Basic for applications, so it was kind of front end and kind of back end. It was full stack, but you just had the database like on the computer that the application was on, and not on some cloud somewhere, because this was 2003, so we didn't really have too much in the way of cloud stuff. And then from there, like my dad knew a bunch of like business owners, and he didn't really do HTML websites, and I knew how to do HTML websites. And so it was really more about my addressable market, it was about the people I knew that I could sell websites to. So then I made a bunch of websites. The more I made it, the easier it was to sell those websites to later people, like, because I would add each one to my portfolio, and they would go, oh yeah, and I was a kid, and so they kind of wanted to help me out, so they'd let me do their website. Nobody thought websites were a big deal back then. After I had built a few websites, I got hired at a place that built websites for dentists. So then I built websites for dentists. And so, it was just whatever was available, really. And it wasn't something that I was like super drawn into. It was more just that I wanted a job that paid money dollars. And so, like, a lot of times people talk about like what they're really super into, but if what you need like today is money, then it's totally fine to just kind of go into whatever is nearby, whatever is easiest to get into that pays a decent amount. And like that was my only consideration until I got much later in my career, and then I could be all like, well, what I want to do is justice. But for a bit, I really I made websites for multi-level marketing companies, because they have money, and so I needed that money. So a lot of things, especially when you're in the beginning of your career and you're just trying to like pay for your own apartment and like get off your parents' cell phone plan, like then it's really just what is available, and that's okay. Like you're not a bad engineer because you're not like personally trying to do the highest leverage thing as your very first thing out of the gate. It's cool to just like get paid and like learn the ropes.
Iris, did you want me and Noel too, or would that focus more on Liz and Mari?
Feel free if you feel like you have any additional, like, I guess if you feel like you want to share your journey, that would be helpful. But if not, we can also move on to kind of wrapping everything up.
I guess the only thing I want to say is my girlfriend also is a software engineer, and the one thing that we both concluded, and I think I hear from these three as well, is a lot of it isn't conscious choice. It's like you're given a fork in the road and you don't have much information and you take your best guess and it sometimes works out. And I think I heard this from these three. Amy feels the same. I feel the same. It's like I liked math. ML seems like it has more math. I'll do ML. And now I'm here.
Yeah.
I completely agree with a lot of like what people were kind of echoing. I think that even if you aren't super sure like what you want to do, sometimes it's totally fair to take something just for the stability of it all. I will say for me, like when I was coming out of college, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But taking the job at Google definitely was life-changing in terms of helping me get stability and all of that kind of thing. And it's definitely enabled me to get on my current path to CS education. So I think regardless, a lot of these kind of jobs can be very life-changing.
Yeah, and I will add that just because you started off in one part of the stack does not mean you don't have the opportunity to switch. So I've seen people switch from front end to back end, like done every part of the stack switch. So I think at any point, if you decide like, oh, this other thing looks more exciting, yeah, definitely pursue it. So I think generally it's easiest to do that within company, but you're not like stuck with whatever you end up picking. All right, so we weren't able to answer all the questions, but I think feel free to reach out to any of the instructors if you want our perspective on any of these questions. And we'll wrap up with some, I guess, like last final thoughts or any words of advice that any of the instructors have. I guess I can start. I think there's a lot of, like looking at the Slido, there's a lot of like anxiety on not being ready. So generally, I think everyone has done a great job. I think all the content we have in these courses really reflect on what's being asked in the interviews. So generally, I think even after this course ends, I just recommend everyone to stay consistent. And sometimes if you're feeling burnt out, like it's totally fine, like take some time off, but in general, just kind of make sure you set a good schedule for yourself to practice. And the other thing is, I think you'll never feel 100% prepped. So at a certain point, you just have to apply and get that ball rolling. And I'm confident that everyone will do fairly well. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are anxious on what company they're going to end up in. So it's important to realize that the first company will probably not be the company of your dreams. You're going to enter that company, then you're going to find like there are things that you didn't thought were going to be a part of it. Like it's not like what you thought it was. So like you might end up at your dream company, but realize that the people there don't mesh with you. You might find that there are certain things you don't agree with the company, and that's fine. Not everyone is going to stay in one company for the rest of their lives. That was the previous generation. For us, it's like every few years you switch companies, and that's totally normal. Now, having said that, if you want to have that opportunity, you need to realize how important interviewing skills are and how much of an investment you should put into it. I have seen so many people out there that are stuck in their current jobs because of golden handcuffs and because they couldn't interview anywhere else. Don't be that person that can't leave some company because they're paying you an obscene amount and you can't interview anywhere else and get a better offer. Don't be stuck at like one position just because of the salary and you can't interview. So make sure you are investing a lot in your interviewing skills, because that is the single most important skill that you want in your software engineering career.
My advice would be just don't give up. Like, no matter how many times you fail an interview or whatever, you will get there. It's all just, you fail that interview, but you learn that interview question. And now if you see it again or something like it, you're covered. And so just keep going. It's always kind of a cliche that we say, like, excellence is a habit, not, something we do one time. And so, but it really is like, there are so many times when people told me directly to my face, you're just not cut out for this, you should quit, like in an interview. And if I had listened to them, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have done any of the cool things that I did. And in the beginning, there were people who were like, you're not that good at this. So maybe you're like more of you could be like a help desk person. And I was like, I don't, and nothing against help desk person, but like that, I wanted to move forward and people kept telling me to move backwards. So anyone that's telling you you should quit or you're not good enough at this, that's just their own insecurity. Keep going. Don't stop. That's all, that's the main thing.
I don't think I have any advice, particularly following that good advice. I'll reiterate what other people said. I've seen the code path quality. The bar is high. You're all passing the bar. You all have the skills. I've been only impressed with what I see, and I'm every LinkedIn connection. I'm very excited to see another bright future pop up on my feed. I'm very excited. Best of luck to all of you.
Yeah, I feel like I have very similar closing thoughts. I just wanted to say I'm really proud of the progress I saw in a lot of the students I got to teach during the course. Even just being around like the early weeks to now, I saw a ton of growth in like people's HackerRank results and the questions that they were asking. So definitely keep up the great work, and I'm sure you'll get where you want to go.
All right, good work everyone this year. And thank you for all the instructors who took time out of their Saturday to answer all the questions. Feel free at any point to reach out to any of us if you have additional questions. All right, bye everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Good luck. Keep going. Y'all are the best.